March 14, 1984. Webster Falls, Iowa. Population 3,417. Though the sign at the city limits still claimed 4,000 from better days, when the corn came tall and the banks stayed full, and men could shake hands on a deal without lawyers hovering like crows over carrion. Eleanor Brennan counted the bills one more time on the kitchen table, smoothing each crumpled dollar against the formica surface with the kind of care you give things when you know they're all you have left between you and the streets. $38. She'd counted 3 times in the last 10 minutes, each time hoping the number might change if she just looked at the pile from a different angle, shifted the 5s and 1s into a new arrangement, pretended hard enough that mathematics worked differently for desperate women than it did for everyone else. 9 days until the landlord knocked. 9 days until the eviction notice stopped being yellow paper taped to her door and became something with teeth, with consequences, with the kind of finality that left families sleeping in cars or shelters or on the mercy of relatives who'd already made it clear that mercy had limits. The apartment smelled like old wood and something cooked days ago that Eleanor couldn't quite place anymore. 3rd floor walk-up. Peeling floral wallpaper that someone had chosen in 1971, back when avocado green meant modern and shag carpet was the height of sophistication, and people still believed Nixon when he said he wasn't a crook. The heater had quit working in January. The landlord promised to fix it the same way politicians promised prosperity, with words that sounded good and actions that never materialized. February came and went. Now it was March, and the cold still crept through the windows at night. The kind of damp Iowa cold that settled into your bones and stayed there, made you wonder if you'd ever feel warm again. Wyatt sat at the table across from her. 9 years old, wearing sneakers with holes in both toes, the rubber sole separating from the canvas upper like a mouth opening to speak truths nobody wanted to hear. His brown hair stuck up in the back where he'd slept on it wrong. He watched his mother count the money for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, and his face had that expression Eleanor had learned to dread, the one that said he understood more than a 9-year-old should, that he'd stopped being a child somewhere in the last 3 years and become something else, something harder, something that knew how to watch his mother fail and pretend he didn't notice. "Can we get milk today?" Eleanor's hand stopped mid-count. She looked at the oatmeal she'd made with water instead of milk. The bowl sitting in front of Bryn, who was 6 and didn't understand yet why breakfast tasted different lately, why the consistency was wrong, why her mother kept saying tomorrow when tomorrow never seemed to come. The little girl pushed the spoon around, making patterns in the gray paste like she was sculpting something from clay, turning survival into art, the way children do when they don't know yet that some things can't be fixed with imagination. "Tomorrow, sweetheart. Tomorrow we'll get milk." The lie tasted worse than the oatmeal. Tomorrow she'd have $38 or less, depending on whether the Chevette needed gas to get to another interview. She wouldn't get another door closing in her face, another person looking at her resume, the way you'd look at expired meat in a grocery store with that particular blend of pity and disgust that said they'd rather not touch it even to throw it away. Bryn looked up with those wide eyes, the kind of trust that made Eleanor's throat close up, the kind that made her want to scream at walls that wouldn't listen anyway, at a God who seemed to have stopped taking calls from desperate mothers in 3rd-floor walk-ups with broken heaters and $38 between them and homelessness. She'd been a stay-at-home mother for 11 years, met Garrett Brennan when she was 22, married at 23 because that's what you did when a charming man with big hands and bigger promises asked when your mother said he had good prospects and your father said he seemed like the kind of man who could provide. Babies came fast because that's what you did in Iowa in 1973. Wyatt first, then Bryn 3 years later. And somewhere in those years, Eleanor stopped being a person with dreams and became a function wife-mother, keeper of a home that never quite felt like hers. Garrett worked construction. Charming smile, those big hands promises that seemed solid as concrete until you realized concrete cracked under pressure. They'd bought a house on Maple Street with a yard and a swing set he'd built himself one Saturday in June, and for a while Eleanor believed in the American dream, the way people believe in Santa Claus, knowing it's probably false but wanting it to be true badly enough that you suspend disbelief, you play along, You smile for the cameras. Then, 1981 hit. The recession crashed through Iowa like a tornado through a trailer park, indiscriminate and devastating. Construction dried up like corn in August drought. Garrett started drinking not the social kind, the Friday night beer with buddies kind, but the angry kind, the kind that made him throw things and blame Eleanor for every unpaid bill and every meal that wasn't perfect and every way the world disappointed him that he couldn't fix with his hands or his charm. By 82, he'd developed a gambling habit that ate their savings faster than termites in old wood. Came home one night in February 83, packed a duffel bag, with the kind of efficiency that said he'd been planning this. Said he was going to Sacramento where his cousin had work. Kissed the kids without looking them in the eyes. Didn't kiss Eleanor at all. Walked out with $4,000 they'd saved for Wyatt's braces and Bryn's school supplies and the future that was supposed to exist beyond next month's rent. 3 years now, no letters, no phone calls. No child support checks that bounced or arrived late because at least late meant someone was trying. Just silence, the kind of silence that filled every corner of the apartment like carbon monoxide, invisible and deadly. Eleanor filed papers, but you can't garnish wages from a ghost. Can't chase a man who doesn't want to be found. Can't force someone to be a father when they've already decided their comfort matters more than their children's survival. She'd moved from the house on Maple to this apartment on 4th Street where the paint chipped and the radiator clanged at midnight like someone hammering on pipes trying to send Morse code messages about how systems fail when nobody maintains them. Spent her savings on rent and food until the savings ran dry like a river in drought season. Applied for welfare, 6-week waiting list. 6 weeks might as well be 6 years when you had 9 days. She'd worked before marriage. Waitress at the diner on Main Street from 72 to 74, made decent tips, could carry 4 plates at once, and remember, orders without writing them down, had the kind of efficiency that came from necessity meeting opportunity. But that was a decade ago, and the world had moved on without her. Technology changed. Systems changed. She hadn't touched a computerized cash register, hadn't filled out a job application in 10 years, didn't have references from recent employers because there weren't any recent employers, just a blank space on the resume where a career should have been, where competence should have been documented, where proof of value should have existed. The first rejection came on March 15th. Henderson Farm Supply inventory clerk position, $5.25 per hour. Eleanor had worn her best skirt, the navy one she'd bought for Garrett's cousin's wedding in '79, ironed it twice, applied lipstick in the Chevette's rearview mirror before walking in because presentation mattered, because looking professional might compensate for lacking qualifications. The personnel manager was a man named Peterson. 50s, balding, reading glasses on a chain around his neck like a leash. He looked at her application the way you'd look at expired milk, with that particular combination of disappointment and inevitability that said he'd known this was waste before he even opened it. "You've been out of the workforce for 10 years. "Yes, sir. I was raising my children. "And your last job was waitressing." "Yes, sir. But I'm a quick learner. I can—" "Technology has changed, Mrs. Brennan. We use computerized inventory systems now. Barcodes, digital tracking. You've never touched a computer. I can learn. We need someone who can start immediately without training. Someone current." The word current landed like a fist. Not qualified, not experienced, not wanted. Just current, as if Eleanor was a magazine subscription that had lapsed, something that used to have value but didn't anymore. Something to be replaced with a newer model that understood the systems she'd missed while raising children who needed her more than employers did. "I'm sorry." The drive home took 12 minutes. Eleanor cried for 10 of them, then wiped her face before walking into the apartment so Wyatt and Bryn wouldn't see, so she could pretend she was still their mother, who had everything under control, who knew how to fix problems, who understood how the world worked, even when the world clearly didn't understand her. March 16th. Webster City Feed Mill, loading dock position, $5.50 per hour. Heavy work, but Eleanor was willing. Desperate made you willing for anything. Things you'd never considered work that broke your back. Humiliation that broke something deeper. The foreman was Rick Dawson. 42 muscular in that way that came from years of actual labor rather than gym membership's suspicious eyes that took in Eleanor's height and weight and dismissed her before she finished introducing herself. "This is men's work, 50-pound feed sacks all day. You're what, 115? But I'm stronger than I look. Lady, I got guys lined up who can do this without throwing their backs out. You'd slow us down, cost me money, can't use you." The words hit harder than the first rejection. Not just unqualified, unwanted, wrong body, wrong gender, wrong everything. The kind of rejection that said the problem wasn't her resume but her existence, her fundamental unsuitability for a world designed for people who weren't her. March 17th. First National Bank. Teller position $6 per hour. The manager was Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor would remember that name later, though she didn't know it yet. Didn't know how names and coincidences and small-town connections would loop back on themselves like roads in the countryside that all led eventually to the same place. Professional woman. Kind eyes but firm mouth. Burgundy suit that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe, more than she'd spent on clothes in the last 3 years combined. Banking requires certification, Mrs. Brennan. 6-week course through the state program. Costs $180. Can you afford that? The number landed like a punch. 180 was more than half of what Eleanor had left. Half of nothing. I don't have that right now. Then I'm afraid we can't consider your application. I'm sorry. Eleanor drove to Main Street Grocery next. Cashier position $5 per hour. The manager was younger, maybe 30, with a corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile they probably taught in management training seminars about how to reject people without opening yourself to lawsuits. You've been out of the workforce a decade. Technology changed. We have computerized registers now, scanners, digital payment systems. You've never worked with any of this. I can learn quickly. I'm good with numbers. We need someone with current experience, someone who won't need weeks of training. I'm sorry, always sorry. Everyone was sorry. Sorry, but not sorry enough to actually help to take a chance to see past the resume gap to the desperation underneath, to understand that current experience was a luxury you couldn't afford when you were 9 days from eviction with $38 and 2 children watching you fail. Sunset Gas Station. Attendant position $4.75 per hour. Minimum wage pumping gas and running the register. The boss wanted someone with mechanical knowledge references from recent employers. Eleanor had neither. Just hands that were willing, and a back that would bend, and a pride that was already broken enough that one more rejection barely registered. Franklin Elementary School. Cafeteria worker $5.15 per hour. Food service certification required 6 weeks and $200. Eleanor didn't have 6 weeks, didn't have $200, didn't have anything except the growing certainty that the world had moved on without her and wasn't interested in letting her catch up. March 22nd, 8 days left. Eleanor was back at Henderson Farm Supply. Different position this time, inventory clerk $5.35 per hour. Same manager, same reading glasses, same look of recognition that curdled into something like pity mixed with annoyance. The expression people get when they see the same homeless person on the same corner asking for the same help they already refused once. Didn't we already talk? Yes, sir. But this is a different position. I thought maybe answers still no. You need experience. Come back when you have some. How am I supposed to get experience if no one will hire me? That's not my problem, Mrs. Brennan. 7 rejections. 7 variations of not good enough, not qualified, not wanted. Eleanor sat in the Chevette in the Henderson parking lot afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white, hard enough that her calloused palms ached hard enough that she wondered if she just held on tight enough. Maybe the world would stop spinning long enough for her to figure out how to get back on. The car smelled like burning oil. The transmission slipped when she shifted from second to third with that grinding sound that meant expensive repairs she couldn't afford. The passenger door didn't lock anymore, hadn't locked since January when Wyatt tried to close it too hard, and something broke inside the mechanism, something that would cost more to fix than the car was worth. Wyatt had asked that morning why they couldn't go to McDonald's like his friend Tommy's family. Bryn had asked if they were poor, her 6-year-old voice making the words sound like a disease. Something shameful. Something that happened to other people, but wasn't supposed to happen to them. Eleanor had smiled and lied and felt pieces of herself crack like old ceramic that had been dropped too many times, glued back together. Too many times until the cracks outnumbered the original material and you couldn't tell anymore what it had looked like before it broke. The crying came in waves. Quiet at first, then harder, the chest-heaving kind of sobs that made her nose run and her mascara smear, the kind that left her gasping for air like she'd been underwater too long. She cried for the house on Maple Street they'd lost, for the marriage that had rotted from the inside out like wood exposed to weather, for Garrett, who'd left them like trash on a curb, like something that had outlived its usefulness, for the $38 that wouldn't stretch to cover rent and food and gas and everything else that life required, for the eviction notice waiting at home like a bomb with a timer ticking down, for being 35 years old and having nothing to show for it except 2 beautiful children who deserved better than oatmeal made with water. A knock on the window made her jump. Wyatt stood outside, backpack over one shoulder, confusion and worry fighting for space on his young face. Eleanor had forgotten she'd parked near his school. Must be 3:15 already. Time moved differently when you were drowning, sometimes too fast, sometimes not fast enough, never at the pace you needed. "Mom, why are you crying?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek in a dark streak that probably made her look worse than the crying did. "Just tired, baby. Come on, get in." The drive home was silent. Wyatt kept glancing at her, questions forming and dying on his lips, the way children learn to stay quiet when they sense their parents are holding on by threads. Eleanor wanted to tell him it would be okay, wanted to promise things she couldn't deliver, wanted to be the kind of mother who had answers, instead of the kind who counted $38 and hoped for miracles she'd stopped believing in. That night after the kids went to bed, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad. She'd done this math 17 times already, but kept hoping the numbers would change if she just arranged them differently, if she just tried harder to make 2 + 2 = 5. The numbers never changed. Mathematics didn't care about desperation. Rent due. March 21st. $360. She had 38. Even if she sold everything she owned, the furniture from Goodwill, the dishes from garage sales, the clothes that had been washed until the colors faded, she might scrape together another 100. Still 200 short. Still not enough. Still failing. The landlord had already given her an extension in February, when she'd only had half the rent, when she'd promised the rest was coming, when she'd believed her own lies because the alternative was admitting she'd run out of options. There wouldn't be another extension. She'd seen it in his eyes last time, that calculation landlords make between compassion and commerce, the moment when they decide your problems cost more than your humanity is worth. She thought about calling Garrett's parents in Des Moines, dismissed it immediately. Too proud, maybe, or too aware that they'd blamed her for the divorce anyway. Said she must have driven him away with her nagging, or her appearance, or her fundamental failure to be whatever they thought their son deserved. As if their son had been some prize worth keeping, instead of a man who abandoned his children and took their money and left them to starve slowly in a third-floor walk-up with a broken heater. Her own parents were dead. Car accident in '78 on I-80, black ice, and a semi-truck, and the kind of instant death that was supposed to be merciful but mostly just left you alone. Only child, no siblings, no safety net, no family except the children depending on her to figure this out. Friends from high school had moved away or moved on. Webster Falls was full of people who knew her story, which made it worse somehow. Everyone watching, everyone whispering. The divorced woman who couldn't keep her husband or pay her rent. The waitress who thought she could do better and ended up doing worse. The cautionary tale parents told their daughters about what happened when you made bad choices, when you trusted the wrong man, when you thought love was enough to build a life on. March 23rd. Friday. Eleanor walked to the post office to mail job applications to Cedar Falls and Waterloo, 30 miles away, because maybe distance would help, Maybe no one there would know her story. Maybe starting over somewhere new was the answer, even though she didn't have money for moving deposits or gas or anything beyond the stamps. She spent $3 on stamps, which left 35. The arithmetic of poverty: every dollar spent was a dollar lost. Every purchase a calculation of necessity versus survival. Every choice a gamble with stakes too high to comprehend. The self-service kiosk near the post office door had a bulletin board covered in flyers. Garage sales advertising treasures that were someone else's trash. Lost cats with rewards she'd never collect. Church bake sales she couldn't afford to attend. And tucked in the corner, written in blue pen on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who'd learned cursive before computers made it obsolete: farm help needed. Apply at MacKenzie Farm, 6 miles east on Highway 20. Eleanor stared at the sign. Farm work. She didn't know anything about farming. Grew up in Des Moines, where agriculture was something that happened in the countryside you drove through on the way to somewhere else. Concrete and street lights and suburbs where the closest thing to farming was the vegetable garden her mother kept in the backyard. Moved to Webster Falls when she married Garrett, but stayed in town in the house on Maple with its postage stamp lawn and chain-link fence. Never ventured out to the farms that sprawled across the county like patchwork quilts stitched from dirt and corn and soybeans, and generations of families who knew the land the way she knew the layout of her apartment, intimately, instinctively in the dark. She couldn't tell a tractor from a combine, didn't know soybeans from field corn until they were on her plate. Had never driven anything bigger than the Chevette, never fixed anything more complicated than a leaky faucet, never worked outside in her life beyond mowing that tiny lawn on Maple Street. But $35. 6 days until eviction. 7 rejections that all said the same thing: not qualified, not experienced, not current, not wanted. What did she have to lose, except the last shreds of pride she'd been clinging to, the pretense that she had options, the illusion that tomorrow might somehow be different from today? The Chevette burned oil worse on the highway, black smoke puffing from the exhaust every time Eleanor accelerated, every shift from second to third, accompanied by that grinding sound that meant the transmission was dying, the same way everything else in her life was dying, slowly, inevitably, with warning signs she couldn't afford to address. 6 miles felt like 60. Cornfields stretched on both sides of Highway 20, brown and dead from winter, waiting for spring planting that would come soon, waiting for farmers who knew what they were doing to coax life from dirt. Farmhouses dotted the landscape, white or red or weathered gray, surrounded by barns and sheds and equipment that looked like sleeping metal giants, machines that cost more than Eleanor would earn in a decade, investments that required knowledge she didn't have. MacKenzie Farm announced itself with a painted sign at the end of a gravel driveway. 450 acres. According to smaller letters underneath that proclaimed ownership and pride and permanence, the kind of establishment that had been there before Eleanor was born and would be there after she was gone. She turned in gravel, crunching under tires that needed replacing, rubber worn thin enough that you could see the threads beneath. The driveway curved past a white 2-story farmhouse. Pristine white paint, black shutters, wraparound porch, like something from a magazine about country living. The kind of house that said someone cared about appearances, about maintaining what they owned, about standards Eleanor hadn't been able to meet in years. Beyond it stood a red barn, the kind you saw on postcards, tall and proud, with a cupola on top, and doors wide enough to drive equipment through. 3 equipment sheds lined up like soldiers at attention. Tractors parked in neat rows. John Deere green and Case YH red, everything organized, maintained, professional in a way that made Eleanor's stomach twist. This was a real operation. Serious. She was about to embarrass herself in front of people who would know instantly that she didn't belong here, that she was city trash playing dress-up in the countryside, that her desperation was showing like a slip beneath a skirt. But $35. 6 days. Eleanor parked near the largest shed, killed the engine. The Chevette made a dying wheeze and went quiet, mechanical death rattle that sounded like her life felt. A woman worked outside, hanging laundry on a line that stretched between 2 poles, white sheets billowing in the March wind like surrender flags. Margaret MacKenzie was 60 years old, though Eleanor didn't know that yet, didn't know anything except that the woman had kind eyes when she turned when she saw Eleanor stepping out of the Chevette in her city clothes, navy skirt flats with scuffed toes, clean hands that had never touched farm equipment, hands that trembled slightly as Eleanor smoothed her skirt, tried to look professional, tried to look like someone worth hiring instead of someone 6 days from homeless. "You hear about the job, honey?" The honey caught Eleanor off guard. Kindness where she'd expected dismissal, warmth where she'd braced for rejection. "Yes, ma'am. I don't have farm experience," but Margaret set down the laundry basket, wiped her hands on her apron with the kind of efficiency that came from decades of similar motions, decades of work that didn't show unless you looked closely at the calluses, the strength in those hands that belied the gentle expression. "Come inside. Let's have coffee first." Inside meant the farmhouse kitchen, warm despite the March cold outside, clean in a way that spoke of daily maintenance rather than occasional effort. Table that looked handmade, chairs that matched windows that let in natural light, curtains that had been ironed. Everything Eleanor's apartment wasn't cared for permanent home rather than temporary shelter. Margaret poured coffee from a percolator that had probably been making coffee since before Eleanor was born. Set mugs on the table, sat across from her with the kind of patience that said she had time, that rushing wasn't necessary, that sometimes people needed to be heard before they could be evaluated. "Tell me about yourself, honey." And Eleanor told her. Not the rehearsed elevator pitch she'd tried at the other interviews, the polished version that emphasized her strengths and minimized her gaps. The truth. Married young. Stayed home raising children while the world moved on. Husband left 3 years ago with their savings. 7 job rejections in 8 days. $35 between her and eviction. 2 children who needed their mother to figure this out, and a mother who had no idea how. The tears came without permission. Eleanor tried to stop them, wiped at her face with napkin that Margaret pushed across the table, fought for composure, the way you fight for air when you're drowning. But the kindness undid her more completely than the rejections had. Someone was listening. Someone wasn't dismissing her before she finished speaking. Someone saw her as human rather than problem to be avoided. Margaret let her cry. Didn't offer platitudes or false promises or the kind of toxic optimism that said everything would be fine when everything clearly wasn't. Just sat there present, waiting the way you wait for storms to pass because rushing them never works. When Eleanor finally stopped, when the tears dried up and left her feeling hollow and exhausted and strangely lighter, Margaret spoke. "I'm going to tell you something, honey. 28 years ago, I was you." Eleanor looked up surprised. Margaret didn't look like someone who'd ever been desperate, ever been one bad day from disaster, ever counted dollars and wondered which child would eat. 1956. My first husband died in a tractor accident, left me with a farm I didn't know how to run and a baby 6 months old. Everyone said sell it. Move to town. Find a man to take care of me. I said no. "You know why I'm telling you this?" Eleanor shook her head, throat still too tight for words. "Because I see myself in your eyes. That look not quite broken yet, but close. That desperation that makes you willing to try anything. You're not here because you want farm work. You're here because you need a chance." Margaret stood, walked to the back door, called out toward the equipment shed where a man was working bent over a tractor engine with the focused intensity of someone solving a puzzle that had actual solutions. "Bob, come in here a minute." Robert MacKenzie was 61, though Eleanor would learn that later would learn all the details that mattered and some that didn't. Over the months and years that followed, if this moment went the way she desperately needed it to go. Weathered face lines carved deep from decades outdoors, blue eyes that assessed without judging work clothes that had been washed so many times the fabric was soft as skin. "Margaret says you need work." Eleanor stood, fought the urge to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for being the kind of problem that required other people's time and consideration. "Yes, sir. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever—" Mac held up his hand, stopping her mid-pitch. "One question. When work gets brutal, and it will get brutal, are you the type who walks away? The question cut through everything else. Not about her resume or her qualifications or her lack of experience. About character. About determination. About whether desperation was enough fuel to power through the kind of difficulty that made other people quit. Eleanor met his eyes, found her voice spoke the truth that mattered more than any lie she could have told. "No, sir. I can't. My kids depend on me." Mac looked at Margaret. Some unspoken communication passed between them, the kind of shorthand that came from decades of partnership, of making decisions together, of trusting each other's judgment more than their own. "What do you think?" Margaret smiled. "Hire her. I'll help train her." Mac nodded, turned back to Eleanor. "Okay, $6 an hour, 40 hours a week. Start Monday morning, 6 a.m. Wear work boots and jeans. That skirt won't work here." Eleanor's knees nearly gave out, prepared for rejection. Number 8. Her body had already started the familiar shutdown, the emotional armor that made it possible to hear no without completely collapsing. But yes felt foreign, dangerous, like maybe she'd misheard. Maybe this was a dream she'd wake from and find herself still in the Chevette, crying in the parking lot. "I don't have work boots." Goodwill on 5th Street usually has some. Get jeans, too. Work shirts. Gloves if they have them. "Yes, sir." "Thank you." "When do I—" "Monday morning, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Mac extended his hand. Eleanor shook it, felt the calluses against her palm, the grip firm enough to mean something, the kind of handshake that sealed deals before lawyers made them complicated. "Robert MacKenzie. Most people call me Mac. Eleanor Brennan. My friends call me Ellie. See you Monday, Ellie." The drive back to town passed in a blur. Eleanor cried again, but different this time. Relief tears, gratitude tears, terror tears, because now she had to actually do this, had to prove she could learn farming, when she knew nothing had to justify Mac's faith and Margaret's intervention and the chance she'd been given when 7 other people had said no. At home, she told Wyatt and Bryn over dinner spaghetti with sauce from a jar, because that's what she could afford, pasta that filled bellies if not nutritional requirements. Their faces lit up like 4th of July fireworks, like Christmas morning, like every good thing that had been missing from their lives for 3 years. "You have a job, Mommy. I have a job, sweetie." "What kind of job?" "Farming." "I'm going to learn to be a farmer." Wyatt looked skeptical, 9 years old and already too aware of his mother's limitations, already too familiar with disappointment to trust hope easily. "You don't know how to farm." "Not yet. But I will." That weekend Eleanor spent $29 at Goodwill. Work boots, $9, brown leather scuffed from previous owners, but solid, the kind of solid that meant someone had once cared enough to buy quality, even if they couldn't afford to keep it. 2 pairs of men's jeans, $7 each, because women's work pants cost more, and she couldn't afford the difference, couldn't afford the gender tax that said identical fabric cut slightly differently deserved an extra $3 per pair. 3 work shirts, 6 total faded flannel that had been washed so many times the colors looked sun-bleached, reds turned pink and blues turned gray. Work gloves, canvas with leather palms, $2. She had $6 left. Bought milk, real milk, and watched Wyatt and Bryn drink it like it was Christmas morning, like she'd given them something precious instead of basic nutrition they'd been missing for weeks. Sunday night, Eleanor laid out her work clothes, boots by the door, jeans and flannel shirt on the chair, set her alarm for 5 a.m., lay in bed staring at the ceiling, too nervous to sleep, mind racing through all the ways she could fail tomorrow, all the things she didn't know, all the reasons Mac might realize his mistake on day 1 and send her home. What if she couldn't do it? What if her body wasn't strong enough, her mind not quick enough, her whole existence fundamentally unsuited to this work, the way Rick Dawson's face had suggested when he'd looked at her that day at the feed mill? But $6. And milk in the refrigerator. And 2 children who needed their mother to not give up after 7 rejections just because the 8th yes terrified her more than the previous 7 no's combined. Monday morning, March 26th, 5 a.m. Eleanor, dressed in the dark, drove through empty streets to Highway 20, turned east as the sun started painting the horizon, orange and pink like hope looked when you squinted hard enough to see it. Arrived at MacKenzie Farm at 5:52. 8 minutes early because late wasn't an option, because first impressions mattered even more when you were starting from behind. Mac was already working in the equipment shed. Looked up when her headlights swept across the gravel. Nodded once, went back to whatever he'd been doing before she arrived. No greeting necessary. Work spoke louder than words. "You're early." "Good." He spent 2 hours showing her around. The machine shed 40 by 60 feet concrete floor spotless, despite decades of tractors and repairs that should have left permanent stains. Tools organized on pegboards, every wrench and socket in its designated place, each outline drawn in black marker so you knew exactly where things belonged. Parts shelves labeled hydraulic fluid here, motor oil there, grease guns in a rack by the door. Everything systematic, intentional. The kind of organization that saved time. When time mattered, when breakdowns happened, in the middle of planting season, and every hour lost was bushels not grown, income not earned. Organization saves time. Everything has a place. When you use something, put it back where it belongs. Understand? Yes, sir. The barn next. Red paint, fresh white trim, clean hayloft above equipment storage below. Mac showed her the grain bins, tall silver cylinders that held corn and soybeans from last year's harvest. Explained moisture content and spoilage in terms Eleanor barely understood, but wrote down in the notebook she'd brought the spiral-bound 50-cent one from Walmart, where she'd started documenting everything, like cramming for a test that would determine whether her children ate next month. Your first task. Clean and organize the tool bench in the machine shed. Sweep the floor. Put everything in order. Simple work but important. Shows me you pay attention to detail. 8 hours. Eleanor swept and organized and sorted. Her hands blistered from gripping the broom and lifting unfamiliar tools, the weight and heft of things designed for purposes she didn't yet understand. Back ached from bending and reaching, from using muscles that hadn't been used this way before, from work that was physical in a way. Waitressing had never been carrying plates versus moving equipment. Exhaustion that settled into bones differently. But she finished. Tool bench spotless. Tools sorted by size and function. Floor swept clean enough to see the concrete grain. Found Mac in the barn at 5 p.m. Waited while he inspected her work. Ran a hand along the bench surface, checking for dust. Nodded approval that felt better than praise from people who gave it easily. Good work. Same time tomorrow. That night, Eleanor collapsed on her couch. Body hurt everywhere, hands blistered despite the gloves, back screaming protest at vertebrae compressed from hours of unfamiliar motion. But she'd done it. Day 1, didn't quit. Tuesday brought the tractor. John Deere. 3020 older model, Mac said, was from the 60s, manual transmission diesel engine that coughed blue smoke when it started. Green paint faded in places to almost white but solid. Reliable, the kind of machine that kept working long after newer ones died from complications. Clutch in, shift to first, throttle here, let the clutch out slow. Eleanor tried. Stalled. Engine died with a jerk that rattled her teeth, made her feel incompetent, made her wonder if this was where Mac would realize his mistake, would see that some people just didn't have the mechanical aptitude for this kind of work. Again. Stalled. Third time, fourth, fifth, sixth. A man appeared from the barn, walked across the yard with that particular swagger that said he'd been watching, had been waiting for this moment. Rick Dawson was 42, worked part-time for Mac, hauling grain and doing heavy labor, the kind of work that required muscle and endurance and the belief that physical strength equaled worth. His eyes lit with something meaner than amusement when he saw Eleanor struggling. City girl can't drive stick. Eleanor's face burned, humiliation hot and sharp and public. But she tried again. 7th attempt. The tractor lurched forward, jerky and rough and ugly, but moving. By noon, she could drive it around the yard without stalling. By 4 p.m., she backed it into the shed, tight fit that required precision she didn't know she possessed until necessity demanded it, sweating but successful. Mac watched from the doorway. Didn't praise. just nodded. "You're picking this up faster than I expected. Most people quit after day 2. "I told you I wouldn't quit. People say that. Few mean it. You mean it." Wednesday brought backing grain wagons, the hardest skill Eleanor had encountered, yet wagons that didn't turn like cars, that required steering opposite of instinct, pushing the wheel when your brain screamed pull, unlearning everything you thought you knew about making things go where you wanted them. She jackknifed a wagon twice, nearly hit the barn door, once felt Mac's hand grab the wheel before she did actual damage. "Easy. You're learning." Rick watched from across the yard, shook his head, muttered something to another worker that made them both laugh. Eleanor caught the words "cost him money" and pretended she didn't filed it away in the growing collection of slights she was learning to absorb without reacting, without giving them the satisfaction of knowing they'd landed. By end of day she could back wagons competently. Not perfect, not pretty, but functional. And functional beat elegant when functional meant keeping the job that kept the roof over Wyatt and Bryn's heads. Thursday meant equipment maintenance, oil changes, filter replacements, grease points. Each tractor had 70 to 90 zerks that needed regular servicing, small fittings that required pumping grease into joints and bearings, and places that would seize without proper lubrication. Mac showed her how to work the grease gun, how much pressure, which points needed more attention, the invisible maintenance that kept machines running for decades instead of years. Eleanor's hands cramped from squeezing the gun trigger hundreds of times. Blisters formed on top of yesterday's blister skin that had never done this kind of work, protesting the sudden demands. She wrapped them in Band-Aids from the first aid kit Margaret brought out, kept working, because stopping meant admitting weakness, meant proving Rick right, meant giving Mac reason to question his decision. But something happened. Mac noticed it first. "You've got good hands for mechanical work, natural feel for how things fit together." "Really, I've never done anything like this." "Some people have it, some don't. You do." The words settled somewhere deep, gave Eleanor permission to believe she might actually be capable of. This might have aptitude for something besides carrying plates and remembering orders, might possess skills she'd never had reason to discover until desperation forced her to try. Friday brought fieldwork introduction. Mac drove Eleanor out in his pickup Ford F-25. Oh, that smelled like diesel and old leather, and years of agricultural purpose walked her through cornfield stubble. From last year's harvest showed her soil she couldn't yet distinguish, explained differences she couldn't see but would learn to recognize. This is sandy loam, drains fast, warms up early in spring, good for early planting. That section over there is clay, holds moisture, slower to warm. You adjust planting depth and fertilizer based on soil type. Why not just plant everything the same? Because the land's not the same. Treating it all alike means some sections produce half what they should. Farming is about paying attention, seeing differences, adjusting. Eleanor asked questions throughout. Why not corn every year? How do you know when to plant? What about fertilizer timing? And Mac answered each one with patience that suggested he appreciated curiosity over false confidence, valued someone willing to admit ignorance, and learn over someone pretending expertise they didn't possess. That evening, Friday end of week 1, Eleanor drove home in dying light. Body ached everywhere, hands blistered and raw, back screaming protests at muscles that had been pushed beyond what they thought possible. But she'd done it. 5 days. 40 hours. First paycheck coming next Friday. $240 that would go toward rent, toward food, toward milk. Wyatt and Bryn could drink without rationing. She collapsed on the couch. Wyatt came over, sat next to her with the kind of companionable silence that had replaced his earlier skepticism. "How was your week, Mom?" "Hard. Really hard. But good." Bryn climbed up on her other side. "Are you still a farmer? I'm learning to be one, sweetie." That night after the kids went to bed, Eleanor opened the notebook, wrote down everything Mac had taught her during week 1. Tractor controls, grease point locations, soil types, oil change intervals. Studied it before bed like cramming for finals. Like her life depended on retaining this information because it did, because failure here meant returning to $38 and eviction notices and the kind of desperation that made you willing to try anything until anything ran out. Saturday morning, someone knocked on the apartment door. Eleanor opened it to find Margaret standing there holding a paper bag, smiling with the kind of warmth that still felt foreign after 3 years of cold shoulders and closed doors. "Thought you might need these, honey." Inside the bag, 3 more work shirts, better quality than Goodwill sizes that actually fit Eleanor instead of men's large swimming on her frame. A better pair of work gloves, leather that would last instead of canvas that would wear through, and $40 cash folded in an envelope. "Margaret, I can't pay me back when you can. Bob told me about your first week. Said you're doing real well. I wanted to help. No woman should have to do this alone." Eleanor cried. First time someone had helped without judgment attached, without making her feel smaller for needing assistance, without the subtle implication that her circumstances were her fault, that she'd made bad choices and deserved the consequences. "Thank you. I don't know how to hush. We help each other. That's what women do when men think we can't survive their world. We prove them wrong, and we lift each other up doing it." Week 2 brought more of the same. Longer hours as planting season approached. April meant preparing equipment, servicing what had sat idle through winter, getting ready for the rush that would come when soil temperatures reached the right combination of warmth and moisture and timing that meant corn could go in the ground with reasonable expectation of germination. Eleanor learned by doing. Fixed hydraulic leaks under Mac's supervision. Replaced worn belts and filters and parts that had names she'd never heard before but could now identify by sight, by function, by the role they played in making machines do what farmers needed them to do. By month 2, the work had settled into rhythm. Eleanor arrived early every morning, stayed late when needed, learned to read Mac's moods by the set of his shoulders, the way he approached equipment, the silence that meant he was working through a problem versus the silence that meant he wanted company while he worked. But the town noticed. Webster Falls always noticed. Small towns were like that. Everyone knowing everyone else's business, everyone watching, everyone ready to pass judgment on choices that didn't align with expectations. At the grain elevator where Ruth Weatherly worked the scales and processed receipts and heard all the gossip that farmers carried in along with their loads, the whispers started. The divorced Brennan woman working out at MacKenzie's place. Close quarters with a man who wasn't her husband. Margaret must be blind or stupid or both to allow that woman near her Bob. The gossip grew teeth, became something uglier than speculation. Eleanor and Mac having an affair. That's why she got hired. That's why someone with 0 experience suddenly had access to equipment worth hundreds of thousands, responsibilities that should have gone to men who'd worked farms their whole lives. Sleeping her way into a job she didn't deserve. Eleanor heard it third hand from a woman at the grocery store who didn't realize she was listening, who spoke loudly enough for half the aisle to hear about how some women had no shame, about how everyone knew what was really going on at that farm, about how Margaret MacKenzie was too proud to admit her husband was stepping out. The accusation made Eleanor physically ill. Mac was 61, old enough to be her father, married to Margaret for 41 years. The idea was absurd and disgusting and exactly the kind of thing people said about women who succeeded where they shouldn't, who got opportunities meant for men who dared to exist in spaces that weren't designed for them. Men could work hard and get promoted. Women must be sleeping with someone. She didn't confront anyone. Couldn't prove who started it, though. Rick's smirk every time he saw her suggested theories. Just worked harder, let performance speak louder than gossip, told herself that competence would eventually overcome accusation. But the damage spread. Whispers followed her at the feed mill when she picked up supplies. Eyes assessed and judged at the parts store. The co-op manager, who'd always been friendly, suddenly became cold professional, the kind of professional that meant he didn't want to be seen as approving of whatever impropriety he'd heard rumored. Margaret heard it too. Couldn't avoid hearing it in a town where gossip traveled faster than gospel. Went to the grain elevator one afternoon in late May to drop off soil samples for testing, heard 3 women standing by the scales talking loud enough to ensure she'd overhear. "Did you hear about Bob MacKenzie's new hire? The one with no experience? I heard she's got plenty of experience in other areas, if you know what I mean." Poor Margaret. Everyone knows but her. Margaret set the soil samples on the counter with enough force to make the women jump, turn faces going red when they realized who'd been standing behind them. "Oh, Margaret, we were just talking about my hired hand and my husband." "Yes, I heard. You want to know what I see when I look at Eleanor Brennan? A hard-working mother putting in 16-hour days to feed her kids. A woman who showed up desperate and turned herself into the most competent farm worker we've had in 10 years. My husband and I giving someone the same chance someone once gave me when I was widowed, and everyone said I should sell my farm and find a man to take care of me." Margaret's voice stayed level but cut like a blade sharpened on truth and wielded by someone who'd survived worse than small-town gossip. "Now, if you ladies don't have real work to do, I suggest you find some. And if you have something to say about my family or my farm, you say it to my face instead of whispering like schoolgirls who don't know better." She walked out, left the three women stammering apologies to her retreating back. Ruth Weatherly had witnessed the whole thing from her position behind the scale controls, watched Margaret defend Eleanor with the kind of fierce maternal protection that said this wasn't just about an employee anymore, this was family. Ruth found Eleanor later that week at the farm approached, while Eleanor was servicing a cultivator in the machine shed, hands covered in grease, face streaked with dirt, looking nothing like a woman who had time for affairs even if she'd been inclined. "I need to apologize. I misjudged you when you first started. Listened to what people were saying instead of watching what you were doing. Margaret just defended you at the elevator like you were her own daughter. Made me realize I've been part of the problem." Eleanor straightened, wiped her hands on a rag that was already more grease than fabric. "Thank you for saying that." Ruth hesitated, then spoke the thing she'd been carrying since her husband died 2 years ago in a tractor rollover that left her with medical bills and debt and the kind of grief that never fully faded. "I know what it's like to be the woman everyone whispers about. When Tom died, people said I must not have checked the equipment properly. Must have neglected maintenance, must be somehow responsible for an accident that was just bad luck in physics. Women don't get the benefit of doubt in this world. We get blame for things men do and criticism for things we survive." The alliance formed there. Margaret, Eleanor, Ruth. 3 women who understood what it meant to exist in spaces that weren't designed for them to fight for legitimacy in a world that questioned their competence based on gender rather than evidence. Month 3 brought Rick's sabotage from passive-aggressive to actively hostile. He'd been working for Mac 5 years, expected to move up eventually, maybe take on more responsibility when Mac slowed down, maybe inherit a position that felt earned through time, served even if competence didn't support the assumption. Then Eleanor appeared. No experience, no background female. And Mac gave her equipment responsibilities, trusted her with decisions, treated her like someone capable of growth, instead of someone to be used for heavy lifting until a better option appeared. Rick started undermining her with the seasonal crew. 3 local guys Mac hired during planting and harvest to handle the extra workload. Rick would tell them to check with him before following Eleanor's instructions. Created confusion that made her look uncertain, made it seem like she didn't have authority even when Mac had explicitly given it to her. Eleanor caught it the 3rd time it happened. Pulled Rick aside in the machine shed after everyone else had left, adrenaline making her braver than wisdom suggested. "If you have a problem with me, say it to my face, but don't undermine me in front of the crew." Rick's jaw tightened. Eyes went cold in that way that meant he'd been waiting for this confrontation, had been building toward it. "You think you're special? You're just the charity case. Mac feels sorry for you. I earned this job. You've been here 3 months. I've been here 5 years. And somehow you're getting equipment responsibilities that should be mine. If you worked half as hard as you complain, maybe Mac would trust you more. But you don't. You cut corners. You take shortcuts. You do the minimum and expect credit for the maximum. That's why you didn't get promoted. Not because I'm here, because you're not good enough." Rick took a step closer. Big man used to intimidating people with size, with the implied threat of physical superiority, with the assumption that women would back down rather than confront. Eleanor held her ground even though her pulse hammered, even though Rick outweighed her by 80 pounds, even though being alone in the shed with a hostile man was objectively stupid. But backing down meant losing what little ground she'd gained, meant proving Rick right, meant reinforcing the idea that women couldn't stand up to men when it mattered. "We'll see how long you last." June brought the crisis Eleanor had been dreading since day one. The day when everything that could go wrong did. When Murphy's Law applied itself with the kind of precision that suggested the universe was testing whether she actually meant what she'd told Mac about not quitting when work got brutal. Wyatt woke up June 12th with fever. 102. Face flushed, eyes glassy, complained his throat hurt, and his head felt like someone was squeezing it in a vice. Eleanor gave him children's Tylenol, called Mrs. Anderson, next-door elderly woman who'd helped before, who watched the kids when Eleanor worked late, who represented the kind of community support that existed alongside the gossip and judgment. "Could you check on him every hour? I left my work number on the counter. If the fever goes up or he gets worse, call me immediately." Mrs. Anderson agreed. Eleanor kissed Wyatt's hot forehead, felt like the worst mother in the world, driving away while her child lay sick. Made the kind of calculation every working mother made: rent required income, income required showing up. Showing up meant leaving a sick 9-year-old with a neighbor and hoping nothing went catastrophically wrong. Work started bad and accelerated toward disaster. The cultivator broke down in the field. Hydraulic line burst, sprayed fluid everywhere with the kind of pressurized spray that meant serious mechanical failure. Eleanor tried to fix it, crawled under the machine, couldn't figure out which line had blown. Couldn't stop the leak, wasted 30 minutes before admitting defeat and calling Mac on the radio. He came out, diagnosed the problem in 2 minutes, replaced the line in 15. Didn't criticize, but didn't need to. Eleanor felt incompetent anyway, felt like she should have seen what he saw, should have known what he knew, should be better at this after 3 months. Lunchtime she backed a grain wagon into a fence post. Wasn't paying attention, mind on Wyatt at home with fever, on whether Mrs. Anderson would call, on whether being here instead of there made her a terrible mother or just a desperate one. The wagon corner caught the post bent. The hitch assembly knocked the post over, damage that would cost money and time to repair. Rick saw it happen. Grinned like Christmas morning, like he'd been waiting 3 months for Eleanor to prove she couldn't handle this, to give Mac reason to question his decision. "Told you she'd cost you." Eleanor's car wouldn't start when she tried to check on Wyatt at lunch. Battery dead. Mac had to jump it from his truck. Another delay, another failure, another piece of evidence accumulating in the case against her competence. Afternoon brought the disc blade breaking. Hit a rock buried in the soil, rock that had probably been there since glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago, rock that anyone could have hit. But Eleanor hit it, blade shattered, required an hour to replace time. They couldn't afford, with rain forecast for tomorrow, with work that needed finishing before weather made it impossible. By 4 p.m., Eleanor had caused 3 equipment failures, damaged property, needed a jump start. She felt worthless, incompetent, like everyone who'd rejected her in March had seen something true she'd been too desperate to admit. Maybe she couldn't do this. Maybe desperation wasn't enough. Mac called her into the office at 5. Eleanor prepared herself for termination, calculated how many more weeks she could survive on what she'd saved, wondered if Henderson Farm Supply would hire her now that she had 3 months' experience, wondered if they'd laugh. She sat in the chair across from Mac's desk, fought tears, tried to maintain professional composure, even though her world was ending. Rough day. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry about everything. The cultivator, the fence post, the disc blade. I'll pay for damages." Mac looked genuinely confused. "Pay for what?" "The things I broke because I wasn't paying attention. Because Wyatt's sick and I was worried and I wasn't focused enough, Eleanor. That's normal. Equipment breaks, we fix it. That's farming. But I broke it. Because you're human. Because you were distracted thinking about your sick kid. You think I've never broken equipment? You think I've never had a bad day where everything went wrong at once?" Mac leaned back, chair creaking under his weight, rubbed his weathered face with both hands, in the gesture of a man tired but not defeated. "Let me tell you about my first year farming. 1944. I was 21 years old. My father had just died, heart attack, in the barn. Farm became mine overnight. Didn't know what I was doing. First week I rolled a tractor trying to pull a stuck wagon. Completely flipped it. Broke my collarbone. Destroyed a section of fence. Second week I planted 40 acres at the wrong depth. Had to replant the entire thing. Wasted seed, wasted time, wasted diesel. Third week I backed a wagon straight through the barn door. Knocked the whole door off its frame. Splintered wood everywhere. Eleanor listened. The story didn't sound like a man firing someone. Sounded like something else. Farming is mistakes. Constant mistakes. Equipment breaks. Weather doesn't cooperate. You make wrong calls. Hit rocks you didn't see. The question isn't whether you make mistakes. It's whether you learn from them. Tomorrow you'll check mirrors before backing. You'll watch for obstacles. You'll remember hydraulic lines can fail. That's learning. That's how this works. But I cost you money today. Time. I feel like I'm failing. You're succeeding. Trust me. You've made fewer mistakes in 3 months than most people make in a year. And you work twice as hard as anyone I've had. Mac's voice softened in a way Eleanor hadn't heard before. Go home. Check on your boy. Come back tomorrow. We'll fix what broke today and we'll keep going. That's farming. Breaking and fixing. Planting and hoping. Failing and trying again. Eleanor drove home crying different tears than March. Not desperation tears. Relief tears. Mac believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. That meant something more than she could articulate, more than paycheck or job security. Something about being seen as human rather than problem as person rather than charity case. Wyatt's fever had broken. Mrs. Anderson had given him soup and juice. He was watching cartoons, looking pale but better alive and safe in everything that mattered more than bent fence posts or broken disc blades. Eleanor hugged him so hard he protested, made dinner, put both kids to bed early, sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, wrote down every mistake from today, studied them like lessons, because that's what Mac had said. Learn from mistakes, don't repeat them. New mistakes acceptable, but not the same ones twice. She arrived the next morning at 5:50, fixed the fence post herself, repaired the wagon hitch with Mac's guidance, replaced the disc blade, worked until dark. Didn't break anything, didn't hit anything, focused absolutely, proved yesterday was bad day, not pattern, proved she could recover from failure instead of being defined by it. That was the last time Eleanor thought about quitting. Fall brought harvest. September through October. Weather-dependent time, sensitive work that couldn't wait, because crops ready for harvest didn't care about your schedule or your exhaustion or your preference for 8-hour days and weekends off. The combines ran dawn to dusk and beyond when conditions were right, when moisture levels hit that perfect window between too wet to store and too dry to process efficiently. Eleanor learned to operate the John Deere 7700. Mac showed her the manual, had her study it at home like textbook for a class that determined whether she'd pass or fail at life. Eleanor read it cover to cover 3 times, practiced in the field under supervision until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. Then Mac turned her loose on 40 acres while he hauled grain to the elevator. Trust again. $145,000 of equipment. Thousands of dollars of crop in her hands. Faith that she'd learned enough, grown enough, proven enough that she could be trusted with responsibility that would break most people. She worked 16-hour days during harvest. Dawn to midnight, when weather allowed, when rain threatened, and getting the crop out mattered more than sleep or comfort or the body's protests at treatment it hadn't evolved to endure. The work was physically brutal and mentally exhausting, but Eleanor loved it. The rhythm of it, the urgency. The satisfaction of watching grain pour into the tank, numbers adding up, acres completed, bins filled, success measured in bushels and moisture percentages, and the concrete evidence that she was contributing something real. One night at 10:30 the combine broke down midfield. Bearing went out in the header drive. Eleanor called Mac on the radio, waited while he drove out in the pickup, flashlight in hand, tool bag in the bed. He climbed up to inspect the problem. Rain in the forecast for tomorrow, pressure to finish this section tonight if possible. That's done for now. We'll fix it tomorrow morning. Eleanor surprised herself, words coming out before wisdom could stop them. Can you teach me to fix it now? Mac looked at her. 10:30 at night, both exhausted. Reasonable to quit and start fresh tomorrow when there was daylight and coffee and the pretense of adequate rest. You want to learn to repair a combine bearing at 10:30 at night? If I know how to fix it, I can save you money next time by doing it myself. Mac laughed. Not mocking. Impressed. Okay, let's fix it. They worked until 1 a.m. Eleanor held the flashlight-handed tools, watched every step, asked questions, learned the bearing assembly, how to remove it without damaging the housing, how to press the new one in correctly, how to torque the bolts to specification. Drove home at 1:30. Back at 6 for another day. Sleep became optional. Harvest became everything. November brought the numbers. 23,000 bushels of corn, 12,000 of soybeans, above average yields, good moisture, premium prices. Profit for the year exceeded expectations. Mac paid Eleanor overtime for every hour over 40 October paycheck, $870. November's $620 more money than she'd ever earned, more than Garrett had made most months, even when construction was good. She'd saved $3,000 by year's end, caught up on every bill. Bought winter coats for Wyatt and Bryn, good ones from the department store, instead of Goodwill, thick enough to actually keep them warm instead of just adding layers that didn't quite compensate for the apartment's broken heater that the landlord still hadn't fixed. Life was stable for the first time in 3 years. Food in the pantry, milk in the refrigerator. Rent paid on time without panic or calculation of which utilities could be delayed. Security felt foreign, dangerous, like maybe she'd gotten too comfortable and the universe would notice and correct the imbalance. Margaret invited them for Thanksgiving, first holiday not alone since Garrett left. The MacKenzie farmhouse kitchen smelled like turkey and stuffing and pies cooling on the counter. Wyatt and Bryn sat at the table wearing their new coats, even though the house was warm, wearing them like armor or badges of achievement, visible proof that their mother had succeeded. Mac said Grace spoke words about gratitude and abundance and being thankful for another year of health and harvest. Then turned to Eleanor. Would you like to add anything? Ellie. Eleanor's throat closed up. All the things she wanted to say couldn't say, words inadequate for the magnitude of what this family had given her. Thank you for this food. Thank you for this family. Thank you for second chances. Margaret reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Wyatt and Bryn watched their mother cry happy tears instead of desperate ones, learning that sometimes crying meant things were getting better instead of worse. January 1985 brought the cold snap that froze pipes and made starting tractors nearly impossible. Mac spent a morning in the unheated barn trying to get the John Deere 4440 to turn over engine, refusing to cooperate with temperatures 20 below zero, diesel turning to gel batteries, losing power faster than they could deliver it. Eleanor found him at noon, sitting on the running board. Face gray, breathing shallow. Something wrong that went beyond cold or exhaustion or the normal fatigue that came from decades of farm work. Mac. Are you okay? He waved off her concern, tried to stand, couldn't quite make it. Sat back down with the kind of surrender that meant his body was overriding his will. Eleanor didn't ask again, called Margaret, told her what she was seeing. Margaret drove out, took one look at her husband, called the ambulance over his protests that he was fine, just tired, just needed a minute. The hospital tests showed early signs of heart strain, nothing catastrophic yet, but warning signs that said decades of physical labor and stress were catching up, that bodies wore out like equipment, that even the strongest machines eventually showed their age. Doctor said to slow down, reduce stress, take it easier. Mac was 62, had been farming since he was 21, didn't know how to slow down any more than Eleanor knew how to quit. Margaret called that evening, voice steady, but Eleanor heard the worry underneath, heard the fear that maybe this time the warning signs were serious, that maybe ignoring them would lead to consequences they couldn't fix with maintenance and replacement parts. The doctor says he needs to reduce his workload. He won't admit it, but he's not as strong as he was. I need you to step up, Eleanor. Not just for Mac, for me. I can't watch him kill himself working. Eleanor felt the weight of that request settle across her shoulders like a yoke. She'd been working 9 months, still learning, still making mistakes, but Margaret was asking her to step up not just for the farm, but for Mac's health, for Margaret's peace of mind, for the family that had saved her when she had $38 and nowhere else to turn. "I'll do whatever you need, Margaret." "I know you will, honey. That's why Mac hired you." The years between 1985 and 1992 moved like seasons, predictable in their rhythm, variable in their outcomes, each one teaching Eleanor something she didn't know she needed to learn until the lesson arrived unbidden. Spring brought Eleanor into full management. Mac supervised from a distance now, conserving energy the way the doctor ordered, watching Eleanor make decisions about planting dates and seed selection and equipment deployment with the kind of quiet approval that meant more than words. By November '86, he made it official assistant farm manager, $8 an hour plus quarterly bonuses, responsibilities that included crop rotation planning and labor coordination and the business side of agriculture. Margaret had been teaching her in the farmhouse kitchen over coffee and account ledgers. Rick quit 3 weeks later. Walked out when he realized Eleanor's promotion wasn't temporary charity, but permanent recognition. Mac didn't try to stop him. Just wished him luck finding another job in Webster Falls, where everyone knew Rick cut corners and blamed others when his shortcuts failed. The farm expanded in '87. Mac bought adjacent 100 acres when the neighbor retired. Eleanor handled the purchase negotiations, proved she could navigate contracts and soil tests and legal documents as competently as she operated equipment. She hired Tyler Caldwell that spring '24 with an agriculture degree and a mother who'd run a farm after his father died, who understood that competence mattered more than gender. Asked him Mac's question about quitting, then added her own about respecting women's work. Tyler answered both honestly. Stayed 7 years. Ruth Weatherly came to Eleanor in tears one morning in '87, confessed $47,000 in medical debt from her husband's tractor accident collections, threatening lawsuits and garnishment and ruin. Eleanor remembered Margaret's words about women helping women, offered Ruth the bookkeeping position. Margaret was ready to hand off $7 an hour, plus learning that turned into competence, that turned into 15 years of indispensable service. May '89 brought farm manager title. Mac sat Eleanor down in his office, told her what she'd already known for months. She was running operations, making the calls that mattered, proving daily that the $38 desperate mother from March '84 had become someone who could manage 450 acres and equipment worth hundreds of thousands and business decisions that determined whether the farm profited or failed. $11 an hour plus 20% of net profit. That year the farm grossed $280, netted $104. Eleanor's bonus was $20,800. Total earnings $56,000. She bought a house on Oak Street for $38,000 cash. Owned it outright. No mortgage, no landlord, no eviction notices. Security that felt almost as foreign as the poverty had once felt familiar. Margaret gave her a locket that evening. Gold, delicate, worn smooth from generations of women who'd survived impossible things. Eleanor cried, putting it on, felt the weight of chosen family against her chest. Understood finally that blood wasn't what made people yours, showing up was. September '91 brought Garrett back. 7 years of silence broken by his appearance at Eleanor's door, tan and confident and sober in ways he'd never been when they were married. Wanted to see Wyatt and Bryn, wanted summers and holidays, had lawyer and documentation and rights that apparently didn't expire just because he'd abandoned his responsibilities for 7 years. The custody hearing in November was the second time Eleanor felt truly afraid of losing everything. First time had been March '84 with $38. This time she had stability and security, but Garrett could take her children because biology supposedly mattered more than presence, Margaret testified. Sat in the witness box and told Judge Morrison that Eleanor was family, that she'd been there every day for 7 years while Garrett sent nothing, that showing up mattered more than DNA. Wyatt testified. 16 years old, told the judge his mom had $38 when his dad left, worked 16-hour days to keep them fed and housed, earned the right to be called parent through 7 years of being there when it mattered. Judge Morrison granted Garrett supervised visitation, ordered child support with arrears, kept primary custody with Eleanor. Close call. Too close. But one. March '92. Mac's cough wouldn't clear. Tests showed stage 3 lung cancer. Decades of chemical exposure before safety regulations, before anyone understood that breathing pesticides came with costs that accumulated in tissue and time. 3 to 5 years with treatment, 6 to 9 months without. Mac chose chemotherapy, chose fighting, chose time. Even if that time came with nausea and weakness and hair loss, and the kind of exhaustion that made walking to the barn feel like climbing mountains. Called Eleanor to his office in April. "I need you to run everything during treatment. But there's more. Margaret and I don't have kids. No one to pass this to. We want you to take over. Not eventually. Now. While I can still do the paperwork, while we can plan it right." December 92. They sat at the MacKenzie kitchen table, Mac and Margaret across from Eleanor. Coffee growing cold while they explained owner financing. $25,000 down, $3,800 monthly for 20 years. Total price $937,000 for farm worth $1.1 million. Below market because Mac would rather sell to someone who'd care for it than get full price from strangers who'd treat it like investment property. Eleanor had $88,000 saved. Math worked, but barely. $3,800 monthly meant $45,600 annually. Farm netted $90,000 to $110,000 depending on prices. After payment, she'd clear $44,000 to $64,000. Tight. Possible. Terrifying. January 15, 1993. Eleanor signed papers that made her farm owner in progress. Bank denied mortgage insurance initially, but alternative contracts solved it if Mac died before payoff, and Eleanor had paid 10-plus years with maintained profitability. Margaret would forgive 50% remaining balance. Protection for Margaret, realistic path for Eleanor. The weight hit her driving home. Everything depended on her now. Not just her children's survival, but the farm's future, Mac's legacy, Margaret's security. $45,600 in payments every year for 2 decades, while keeping operations profitable enough to actually live. All required her not failing. 1993 tested that immediately. Worst drought since '88. June rainfall, 30% of normal. Corn germinated poorly. Soybeans struggled. Irrigation systems ran constantly, but groundwater dropped faster than rain replenished. Harvest brought numbers that made Eleanor's stomach drop. Corn down 35%, soybeans down 40%. Gross revenue $190 instead of $290. Net profit $51 instead of $90+. After her $45,600 payment, she cleared $5,400 for living expenses. Impossible. She pulled $15,000 from savings to cover the gap, ended the year with $48,000 instead of $63. First year of ownership, and she'd gone backward financially. 1994 brought floods, biblical rain, 10 inches in 3 days, 80 acres underwater for a week. Corn drowned. She replanted late with soybeans, but late planting meant reduced yields and frost risk and uncertainty that manifested as sleepless nights. But community surprised her. 8 farmers showed up on a Saturday with equipment and seed and labor. Replanted her 80 acres in single day, refused payment. Just neighbors helping neighbors the way rural communities had for generations. Tom Henderson gripped her shoulder afterward. Son of the man who'd rejected her job application 10 years ago, told her she'd do the same for them. That's how it worked. Standing at field edge, watching tractors work in synchronized rows, Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest. She'd spent 10 years proving herself to Webster Falls, enduring gossip and skepticism and hostility. But when crisis hit, they came. Not because they owed her, because she'd earned her place through 10 years of showing up and not quitting and being competent enough that they trusted her with their time and seed and labor. Harvest brought relief. The replanted acres yielded 80% of normal. Remaining fields produced well. Final numbers gross $240, net $68. After payment, Eleanor cleared $22,400. Better. Survivable. 1995 brought perfect weather and record yields and gross $312, net $112. Eleanor clearing $66,004 after payment. She rebuilt savings, paid mortgage principal aggressively, ended the year with $93,000 saved, plus reduced loan balance. First time since buying the farm that financial stability felt possible instead of perpetually one disaster away. June 18, 1996. Mac died peacefully at home, Margaret beside him. Eleanor arrived minutes after the phone call held Margaret while they both cried for the man who'd asked one question in March '84 and changed everything. The funeral filled Webster Falls Methodist Church. 450 people, every farmer in the county. Eleanor spoke because Margaret asked her to, stood at the pulpit, and told 450 people about $38 and 7 rejections, and Mac's question about quitting and the 12 years that followed, because he believed her answer. 2 weeks later, attorney Richard Parsons read the will. Margaret received the farmhouse $200,000 cash, $340,000 in retirement accounts. Mac's brother Thomas got $50,000 in heirlooms. Then Parsons looked at Eleanor. To Eleanor Brennan, I leave 50% ownership of MacKenzie Farm debt-free. Eleanor couldn't breathe. The numbers made no sense until they did. She'd owned nothing owed $777,400. Now owned half a farm worth over $1 million free and clear debt forgiven. Net worth jumped from negative to positive $550,000 overnight. Bob and I discussed this, Margaret told her through tears. He wanted you to have it. You earned it. February 1997. Margaret called from Arizona. 63 years old, winters too hard without Mac moving near her sister selling her 50%. Appraised at $600,000. Eleanor didn't have it, but First National Bank did, same bank that rejected her teller application 13 years ago, different manager who approved $600,000 at 8% 15-year term, $57.40 monthly, because Eleanor had proven herself through 13 years of competent farm management. January 98, Eleanor paid Margaret $600,000, became 100% owner. Total invested $25,000 down, $159,600 paid before Mac died, $600,000 mortgage, $784,600 for farm worth $1.2 million, equity $415,400. The farm was hers, all of it. Everything Mac had built over 5 decades belonged to the woman who'd walked into his shed 14 years ago with $38 and desperation. Eleanor began hiring with Mac's philosophy amplified by her own experience. Asked his question, gave chances to people others wouldn't, valued determination over credentials. 99 brought Sloan Harper, 21, single mother, 8-month-old daughter, desperate. Eleanor asked about quitting when exhausted at 2 a.m. with crying baby and 6 a.m. work start. Sloan cried, said she couldn't quit because her baby needed her. Hired. $8 an hour, bring your daughter if needed. Sloan worked 9 years baby sleeping in Eleanor's office playpen while she worked fields. 2001 brought Deanna Pritchard. 52, divorced, no experience, rejected everywhere. Eleanor saw herself at 35, asked Mac's question, hired her at $750, had Ruth train her in bookkeeping. Deanna worked until retirement became indispensable. Over 20 years, Eleanor hired 28 people. 17 had 0 farm experience when hired. She asked Mac's question every time. 23 stayed longer than 2 years. 82% retention versus 38% industry average. Her philosophy worked because it valued character over credentials, determination over degrees, the willingness to show up over the polish of a resume. Wyatt graduated Iowa State '99 with agriculture business degree, came home wanting to be part of what his mother had built. Eleanor offered co-manager $20 an hour partnership track. Told him he didn't have to farm, could do anything. Wyatt chose this. Chose legacy. Chose the land his mother had earned through 14 years of not quitting. Bryn graduated Iowa State Veterinary School 2003. Became large animal vet serving Hamilton County farms. Didn't farm full-time but helped harvest, treated Eleanor's livestock, connected to the operation through different skills, different calling, different path. Eleanor supported completely. May through September 2005 brought the perfect storm. Triple disaster that tested whether 21 years of success had made Eleanor too comfortable, whether she still possessed the resilience that had carried her through every previous crisis. Flood in May. 10 inches rain 3 days. 80 acres underwater, corn drowned, late replanting with soybeans. Equipment fire in June. John Deere, 7700 combine. Electrical short, $85,000 machine destroyed. Insurance covered $60,000, depreciated value, $25,000 loss. Urgent need for used replacement before harvest. Hail in August. Storm shredded 120 acres of soybeans weeks before harvest. Crop insurance covered 70%, 30% uninsured, $18,000 gone. Financial math became brutal. Expected net profit $120,000, actual after losses $51,000. Mortgage payment due $68,880 annually. Shortfall $17,880. Eleanor didn't have it in reserves. Years of aggressive mortgage paydown had depleted emergency funds. She sold her Ford Taurus for $8,000, furniture for $4,200, jewelry, including wedding ring from Garrett for $3,500, cleaned out personal savings for $2,180. Total $17,880 exactly. Made the mortgage payment with zero to spare, drove $1,200 pickup, slept on air mattress for 6 months. Wyatt found her in the machine shed that evening. "Mom, why didn't you ask for help? Because this is my responsibility." "Not anymore. I'm buying in. $50,000 for 10% ownership. Partnership formed. Eleanor 90, Wyatt 10. His $50,000 rebuilt reserves provided cushion against future disasters, proved that asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. Recovery came faster than expected. 2006 and 7 brought good weather, strong yields, aggressive debt paydown. 2008 mortgage paid off completely. 10 years instead of 15. Eleanor owned the farm free and clear. No debt, just equity, just land she'd earned through 24 years of showing up. December 2008, Eleanor turned 59. Time to retire, to pass the farm to next generation the way Mac had passed it to her. Called Wyatt to the office, snow falling outside, told him she was selling for $1.6 million instead of market $2.4, owner financing $100,000 down, $6,200 monthly, 20 years, 5% interest. $800,000 gift equity, because that's what Mac had given her, a chance and fair terms. Wyatt's voice cracked, thanking her. Eleanor saw herself at 33 in his gratitude, saw the weight of opportunity mixed with responsibility, saw the understanding that this was legacy, this was family, this was what you built when you didn't quit. The retirement party filled the machine shed. 300 people, farmers, suppliers, employees past and present, who'd watched Eleanor transform from desperate mother to farm manager to owner to the person who gave others chances when the world said no. In March 1984, I had $38 and no job, Eleanor told 300 people. 7 places rejected me because I had no experience. MacKenzie hired me anyway. Not because I was qualified, I wasn't. He asked me one question. "Will you quit when it gets hard?" I said no. I kept that promise for 24 years. Standing ovation. Everyone crying. Sloan holding her daughter, now 12. Deanna dabbing eyes. Ruth smiling through tears. Tyler nodding. Wyatt and Bryn standing together, proud of the mother who'd started with nothing and built everything through sheer refusal to walk away when walking away would have been easier. February 2009, Eleanor established the MacKenzie Brennan Second Chance Fund. Donated $150,000 from retirement savings. Requirements: no farming experience necessary, must demonstrate determination, must answer. Mac's question honestly, submit business plan. Benefits: $5,000 to $15,000 grants, not loans. Mentorship from Eleanor and network of farmers, equipment. Access training. 2009 through 2020, the fund helped 31 applicants. 21 still farming successfully. 68% success rate for complete beginners. 8 single mothers, 12 career changers, 11 young people without family farms. Created ripple effect, 21 people now giving others chances. 21 people asking Mac's question. 21 people proving that determination mattered more than credentials. March 2020. 36 years since Eleanor had walked into Mac's equipment shed with $38. She sat on the farmhouse porch, the White House she'd first seen that March day, when everything felt impossible, watched Wyatt operating combine in the distance, 520 acres, now expanded from Mac's original 450. Her 4 grandchildren played in the yard. Bryn's 2 children visiting for the week, learning that work could be meaningful, and land could be legacy, and family could be built through choices rather than just inherited through blood. Ruth visited with coffee, 68 now, still keeping books part-time, still part of the network of women who'd lifted each other when the world tried to push them down. Margaret called yesterday from Arizona, 81 years old, but voice still strong, still carrying traces of the kindness that had saved Eleanor's life 36 years ago. How is she? Good. Still reminding me that we're not supposed to do this alone. Eleanor smiled, looked at the farm spreading out before her, at the legacy visible in soil and equipment, and people whose lives had changed because someone asked the right question and believed the answer. We're not, are we? The land will take care of you if you take care of it, but the people you build around you matter more than the acres you farm. In the end, we're not measured by what we accumulate, but by who we lift up along the way. Mac had asked one question in March '84. Eleanor had answered honestly. That conversation had lasted 30 seconds but changed 36 years. Changed Wyatt and Bryn's lives, changed Ruth and Sloan and Deanna and Tyler and 28 others who got chances they wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. Changed 31 fund recipients who were now changing others. From $38 to this. Because 3 women believed in each other when the world said no. Because Mac saw potential where others saw risk. Because Eleanor refused to walk away when work got brutal. Because showing up mattered more than credentials. Because determination mattered more than experience. Because one person believing in you could change everything if you believed in yourself enough to prove them right. May we all be wise enough to ask the right questions, honest enough to answer them truthfully, and generous enough to give chances to people who just need someone to believe in them. That was the legacy. That was the lesson. That was what happened when one question changed everything.